theories we're looking at this week are departures from, let me go back, from the more, and when I say mainstream, I mean mainstream in academic philosophy, in Western philosophy, the three theories we've covered so far. So remember that when we introduced this stuff, I said, look, some of these normative theories will take their point of departure from the what ought I do question and focus on trying to identify a standard that will distinguish between permissible, impermissible, and obligatory actions. Categorical imperative and the utility principle both give us a standard that does that. And some other theories will take their point of departure, character-based theories take their point of departure from the question, how ought I live, or what kind of person should I be? So when we're looking at care ethics and existentialism ethics this week, think about which question do they seem to be answering more. And then again, some key elements of moral principles that we've covered so far. They're obviously prescriptive, but something that I really want to emphasize about deontology and utilitarianism in particular is that they basically give us a little test to perform, right? Almost like a little algorithm, the universalizability test. Identify the maxim of the action, see if it can be conceived as a universal law. If it can be, then it's at least permissible to act on it and maybe obligatory. If it can't be, if it generates any kind of contradiction of will or a formal contradiction, then it's morally wrong to act on it. And utilitarianism, it's just, calculating units of pleasure and pain, right? And thinking about the future and what would cause more pain or pleasure for the most people. So again, gives us almost a little mathematical problem to work there to figure out the single right answer to all moral questions. So again, key elements of moral principles is, again, the prescriptivity and the normativity of them, but in particular, for the justice perspective, are decision procedures, that little test, right? Whereas we saw virtue ethics doesn't really give us so much of a test, gives us more of a loose guide, right, for virtue and what to do. Universalizability was a key thing. Impartiality was an important thing. Had to be a public principle. It had to be applicable to real world problems. So that ways in which care ethics and existentialist ethics, which we'll look at on Thursday, depart is that they often reject universalizability and impartiality. They often also reject other aspects that were common among those three theories, like intrinsic values. So there's some key things that are departures for these next two theories. We might not even call them theories. Maybe we should call them more broadly moral philosophies rather than restrict theory for those algorithmic, more algorithmic decision procedures like in categorical imperative and the utility principle. Right? So again, we went over that universalizability test, right? And it helps identify, again, what our obligations are, what we're not supposed to do, right? And then the principle of utility, the more foreseeable consequences of goodness or happiness, pleasure, according to the utilitarians, it's obligatory. And if it's the reverse of that, then it's impermissible. So again, we have a little calculation to perform. Care ethics is not going to be emphasizing a decision procedure like that. So that's one of the first big departures. So again, think of what elements that seem to be central to most moral theories are being rejected, and which of these two basic questions do they seem like they're trying to answer more than the other one.